You can build the future at Tomorrow Labs. What a lie. Ever since I was a boy, I wanted to see the stars. Every night I'd look up and dream about exploring the cosmos. When I was older, I was excited to be working at Tomorrow Labs. I expected to be testing space equipment and training to live in a zero-gravity environment, but instead, they sat me down at a desk and had me push buttons all day. I had been doing this job for so long, I forgot why I was even there. Thought this would be full of excitement, but it wasn't. Well, not until the day things began to change. It started like any other day, only once I arrived at work, I noticed men in suits, with dark sunglasses standing outside the building. I asked them what they were doing here. They told me it was private business and that it was none of my concern. I decided to leave things at that. The day continued as normal, until one of my coworkers, Joel Nelson, asked me if I knew anything about the men outside. I answered no, and he began rambling on about theories on why. One theory suggested it had something to do with a strange buzzing sound coming from a restricted part of the building. I didn't know what he was talking about, but apparently these suited men were there to investigate the sound. And maybe it was something dangerous. I, of course, dismissed everything Joel said. He always was a bit of a crackpot, but then he leaned closer and began whispering. He told me he was planning on breaking into the lab at night and see what was really going on. I told him that was crazy and whatever it was wasn't worth it. He seemed to agree with me. Then he returned to his working space. That night I kept thinking about what he said. Began wondering why those men were really there. Thinking about it made me anxious. I began tossing and turning. It's when my phone rang. I was eager to take my mind off the subject, so I quickly answered it. Only, it was Joel on the other line. He was talking 1,000 words a second. Told him to slow down and he explained what happened. He said he successfully broke into the lab and found out what was really making the sound. But he refused to tell me what it was. The little details he did give made no sense. Told him I would come over and that we would sort this all out. But then he interrupted me, saying a black SUV had pulled up to his driveway. And he said the men in the suits were getting out of it. He told me he would hide and try to stay silent, but he hadn't hung up the phone. I waited for a moment, when suddenly I heard shouting and things breaking, and the line went silent. I debated if I should call the cops, if I should go over there, or if I should do nothing at all. After a while, I settled on checking it out myself. If they asked why I was there, I'll just tell them I let Joe borrow something and that I needed it back. As it turns out, I didn't need an excuse, because once I got there, everyone was gone. In fact, even all of Joel's furniture was in place and unbroken. The only thing missing was Joel himself. I hate to admit it, but I was scared. So scared, I decided to call it a night. The next morning, Joel hadn't shown up to work yet. I was beginning to worry. That was until, well, he did. He was acting the same, as if nothing had happened. I was getting creeped out. I was starting to think this was all some kind of sick prank. Right before lunchtime, I grabbed Joel by his shirt collar and pulled him into another room. I slammed him against the wall and demanded he explain. He acted like he didn't know what I was talking about. I began to get more confused. In my anger, I accidentally mentioned the men in the black suits. By the time I realized my mistake, it was already too late. Once I did, he began to look happy again, but this time in a sinister way. I could tell he was trying to hide it, but he wasn't doing a very good job. Pretending to not care anymore, so I left the room. The rest of the day, I nervously continued working. Eventually, it was time for everyone to leave, but I was stopped at the door by a man in a suit. He told me I was needed, that I should follow him. I tried to think of an excuse for why I couldn't, but he wasn't having it. He grabbed me by the arm and began pulling me away. He didn't look very strong, but his grip was tighter than a rattlesnake. He dragged me to the restricted part of the building. There I heard the buzzing sound. It got louder and louder as we went deeper down the corridor. We entered a large room, a bizarre metal device in the center. Men in suits were standing around it, as if it were some sort of ceremony. I noticed Joel was standing among the suited men. Actually, I saw several co-workers in the group, Even people I had seen on the streets tried to get someone's attention, but they didn't even look at me. The men strapped me to a chair and began placing pads all over me. The pads were connected to wires, connected to the machine. I squirmed and screamed, demanding an explanation. One of the men began pushing buttons on the machine, began to whir loudly as blue sparks emanated from it. One of the suited men took off his glasses. His eyes were glowing a bright blue. My blood ran cold. My vision grew blurry. I began to see something in front of me. The walls distorted and melted. I saw planets, galaxies, black holes, everything. I heard a voice. Couldn't hear anything it said, but I still understood it. I reawoke feeling different. I finally did it. I saw the stars. I have to show everyone